homicide?
Winston Stiles, please.
Sorry I'm late. Just wrapped up.
How'd you make up?
Board ruled it a justified shooting.
You're in the clear?
Yeah.
Mr. Stiles, I remind you, you're still under oath. Be seated.
Mr. Stiles, you've already testified that you were one of the 4 persons in the Dauber home the night he, his wife, and daughter were slain.
Yes.
And the other 3 were?
Gareth Foster and them.
Let the record show that the witness is identifying the defendants. And yet we have heard both Nick and Marie Tanninger testify that they were not present in the Dauber home that night, deny ever having seen them.
Yes, they lied.
I didn't hear you.
I said that they lied. They were there.
Tell us again, Mr. Stiles. Why were they there?
To kidnap Mr. Dauber.
Again, sir? Why?
Mr. Dauber was president of an oil company. And we had had demonstrations at his office back when we were into social causes. He was picked at random as a symbol of the establishment.
And who picked him?
Nick did. Nick Tanninger did.
All right, Mr. Stiles. You were going to kidnap Mr. Dauber for $500,000. What went wrong?
What went wrong? What went wrong was we never expected Mr. Dauber to have the guts that he had. He just wasn't going to be intimidated by us. While Marie was tying up Mrs. Dauber, the old man jumped Nick and knocked his gun away. Nick yelled at Marie to shoot. She did. She just let go. And then Nick got his gun and he killed the old lady. And he just kept firing. I couldn't believe what was happening. Then Nick turned to shoot the girl. Gareth saw what was happening and tried to stop it by getting in the way. In a few seconds, they were all dead. Gareth, all of them were dead.
Gareth Foster was killed accidentally.
Yes. Yes, sir.
But his body wasn't found in the home.
No, he was dumped later in an alley. See, Nick said we had to get Gareth out of the house, get rid of his body. That was the last time I saw Gareth.
I remind the jury that according to Inspector Steve Keller's testimony, the body of Gareth Foster was found in an alley on 19th Street the following day. One last question, Mr. Stiles. Why was it necessary to kill Mrs. Dauber and the girl?
That's what I asked Nick later, myself. The answer he gave me was no witnesses.
Thank you.
Mr. Stiles, Gareth Foster was a good friend of yours, was he not? And isn't it true that your motive in being a witness for the prosecution was to avenge the death of your good friend?
No. No, that wasn't the point at all. Gareth and I had agreed to the kidnapping, but we never bargained for murder.
And isn't it true that Gareth and you had a homosexual relationship?
Objection!
Isn't that why you invented this pack of lies, to avenge the death of your lover?
I must object, Your Honor. Counsel has no right to characterize this testimony. It is for the jury to decide who's telling the truth here. And I further object to his again bringing up the homosexual relationship. That point has already been conceded.
Both objections sustained. You have any more questions, Mr. Banchik?
None, Your Honor.
Then this court will stand on recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. All cautions to the jury will apply. Court's adjourned.
defense attorney's rough. I'm not looking forward to another day of cross.
Oh, I wouldn't worry about it, Dan. You can handle it.
Yeah, he put us through the ringer because we headed the investigation. We got Stiles' confession. But you, well, you turned in a good, clean, heads-up collar. There's nothing he can challenge there.
I'm a detective on that one arrest. What do I do if he hassles me on that?
What are you talking about? Any cop who can take Nick Tanninger one-on-one at night, believe me, you deserve your shield, you know?
Right.
Susan!
It's gonna be a long time before those two hit the pavement again.
Yeah? What about them?
The Tanninger family.
Yeah. They're gonna be around. I don't think Stiles doesn't know it. So, what did you finally tell those bozos at Berkeley?
I didn't tell him anything yet, but I'm thinking about it seriously.
Not because of that shooting inquiry.
No, not that. It's just,
Teacher, huh? School teacher.
yeah.
You belong in the classroom about as much as I belong in the ballet russe. Well, listen, where did you park in?
I'm parked right out front, no parking zone.
That figures. Can I drop you off downtown?
Steve and I are having dinner at Manelli's. Maybe see a movie.
We thought you might like to join us since I'm paying for the meal.
You don't know how lucky you are. Kills me to say no. But I'm going home to stroganoff, sour cream and noodles, silverware, real silverware, napkins.
Ooh, Jeannie's home, isn't she?
Mm-hmm. Jeannie's home, that's right. So have a good time, fellas. I'll see you in the morning.
Okay.
He never made the major, right?
I seen him play in the minors, you know. He batted about, 340 was the average.
You look a little more rested today, Mrs. Whalen.
Thank God I'm only a diabetic, not an alcoholic. A boozer go crazy on a long trial like this.
Mrs. Klein, you dropped your notes.
Oh, thank you, dear. Another day. They say we'll be through maybe 3 or 4 more days.
I'm up to here with live shows. I missed the news. I don't know what the hell's going on.
I know he's a pro, and I just don't want him to think I got my detective shield out of a grab bag.
No, I wouldn't worry about it. That's just Mike. If he didn't like you, you'd know about it. What, do you got a police radio in this?
Yeah, CBE, the works.
Does Mike know about this car?
No, I don't think so. Hey, maybe he'd like to borrow it when this case wraps up. Does he like to fish?
Does Mike like to fish? The only thing he covers in handcuffs. See you tonight.
So what do you think, babe?
I think it can work. Come on.
Yeah, I know. You got the same offer last year and the year before. But this time, he's really thinking about it.
Well, I hope so.
What?
I mean it, Mike. Steve will make a dynamite teacher.
Associate professor, that's what they're dangling in front of him now. And money. Good money.
That's great. You want the best for Steve, don't you?
No, of course I want the best for him, but, well, he's too good on the streets to be putting chalk on a blackboard.
Well, like I said, he'll make a fine teacher.
He's already a fine cop.
Well, what can I say? You want me to put out a contract on Berkeley? Hey, Mike. Why don't you offer Steve something that'll make him indebted to you? The old-time kings used to do that, you know, to solidify their kingdoms.
No,
They used to offer their daughters.
I've already tried.
Oh, you did you?
And he said that if that was all the kingdom had to offer, he would settle for Des Moines.
Oh,
Careful now.
You think you're really funny,
Oh,
don't
you
you?
get hurt now.
You
can get
never
hurt that
even
way.
said
You know
how
you
good
can.
the stroganoff was you
It was
ingrained.
the best.
Oh, you got it pretty good, don't
Of course I have.
you? Then lighten up, huh? Stop worrying about Steve.
Well, if I didn't worry about the two of you, my little girl and my partner, I'd have nothing to worry about.
All right, so you say it'll be empty 4 days before they move it?
Yeah.
What about the license plate?
Hey, I got him. I'm even gonna make up a little sign for him, too.
Yeah, how about gone fishing?
Got the 12.
Hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Maybe this is a good time to lay back and figure out what we're getting into here.
Hey, babe. I mean, we know what we're into.
You're sure?
Yeah?
How about you?
Of course. Sure.
This isn't Dick and Jane go to Grandma's, you know? Once we push the button, it's a federal crime. We're in the clear now. We're straight. But once we go, if it sours, it means prison, maybe the gas chamber.
I know. I understand.
Has to be done. That's right. It has to be done. So, let's get it on, huh?
All right, it's on.
Yeah, I visited him in the hospital 5 or 6 times since they took my bullet out of him. You know what really bothers me? How a 17-year-old kid like that thinks. He steals a car, right? Then when he's busted, he pulls out a .38. I mean, what makes him think he can go one-on-one with a cop who's trained to use a gun? Get any answers? No. Sure got a lot of questions, though.
Did the shooting have anything to do with you thinking about leaving the department?
Sure, that was part of it, yeah. But it goes deeper. So I'm thinking about teaching, you know, criminology. Find some answers to some of those questions. What makes a kid like that tick?
And it's not using the gun that's bothering you.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Sometimes I'm tempted to hesitate. I see somebody innocent looking.
What about someone like Nick Tanninger?
Well, that bothers you?
I don't know. When I saw him that night on Broadway, he spotted me too, ducked into a doorway. And I could see his hand go into his pocket. It was like slow motion, the automatic coming back out into his hand. In 4 years, I've seen a lot of people blown away, seen what a Magnum slug can do. Well, I had sort of a choice, go for my gun or throw a shoulder into him and go for his. Pretty dumb, huh?
Well, by the book, yeah, but you took the man alive. I mean, you stand in trial. There's a lot of people very happy to see that man stand trial. Okay, this is mine, remember?
The decision to shoot or not, does it get any easier with experience?
No. No, I think it gets tougher, at least for most of us. Canceling somebody out, you know.
Think we'll get a conviction on the trial?
Yeah, it's a lock. See ya.
Son called last night. The lady deputy sat right there on the other phone and listened to every word we said.
Same breakfast every morning. It's like we're the prisoners.
I think my thermometer must be broken. I took my temperature this morning. It was normal.
If you phone your dad again, tell him to drop by the restaurant after the thing blows over, huh?
All right, sit down somewhere.
Don't get up, don't scream.
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph!
She's been kidnapped.
Tell the brass what's going on down here. Hurry up.
That was a big night on the town. A movie on backpacking.
In the Sierras, right. It was very interesting.
Yeah, it was quite something. Learned about rock climbing, pitching tents, making fires. You should see it. It's on tonight if you
Come
want
on,
to
for
catch
a
it.
guy who won't even walk to the delicatessen, I can just see you with a 60-pound pack. So that's what you do, huh? One of those gung-ho fellas who eats dry food and freezes his feet.
Mike, the jury's been kidnapped. The whole damn jury.
All right, come on. Out!
Oh, move it!
The tape. Where's the tape?
You've got it. I gave it to you.
Oh, yeah, got it.
All right, get on it then. Get back to the car barn. All right, come on, let's go. This way, come on. Come on, move it along.
What happened, Morton?
Deputy's been hit, sir. Citizen reports that shots have been fired from the bus.
How bad is he?
Could have been a lot worse. They must have pumped a whole clip at him.
Got an APB working on that bus?
No, sir. Sorry about that. I didn't find out what went down until right now when I was talking to the deputy.
I got it.
Anybody else hurt?
Not that I know of, sir. Kept the place pretty well cleared until they took the jury out. Is that the Tanager jury, sir?
That's what it was, yeah.
Moving.
APB's laid on. Okay, good. Tell them I want the bridges covered. Notify the Marin County Police that it... Never mind, I'll do it. Take a look at all those casings. Must have been an automatic weapon.
Yes, sir, M16.
How do you know all that?
I was in the Army in Nam.
Mike, they spotted a bus going south on Mission past 10th.
Okay, listen. Get those casings to the lab as soon as possible. Morton, come along with us. I need all the units we can get. Stay on Van Ness, get the 12-lane crossover to Mission. Inspectors 8-1 to headquarters in pursuit of a silver Mark IV tour bus going south on Mission. Request you clear frequency for all-out unit pursuit and intercept.
Now what'd you call it?
Could be closing. 317, possible subject vehicle sighted, Mission and 17th. Proceeding at posted speed.
3 Henry 17, maintain visual contact, do not apprehend. Vehicle may contain hostages. I repeat, do not apprehend.
Just paste it on, Ms. Klein. It'll help the communication problem. All right. Let me go over the rules briefly. No noise will be permitted. Someone will be on guard at all times, And although we don't want to use these, we will.
Miss, this lady, Mrs. Whalen, is a diabetic. Will any provisions be made for her?
No. Any other questions?
Yeah, do you mind telling us what the hell this is all about?
I thought that was pretty obvious.
Not to me, it isn't. The case was already a mistrial. Isn't that what you people are after, a mistrial?
You are being held for the release of Nick and Marie Tanninger and a suitable ransom.
This is crazy. They're not gonna let him go. It's crazy.
Everything's ready below.
All right, come on, get moving, get below. Get below fast.
Move!
All right, let's go.
Right, easy with that gun, will ya?
Watch out. Oh, it's dark out here. Watch out.
Inspectors A1 in high-speed pursuit of vehicle going west on Monterey. To all units, Monterey and 19. Check all the loading docks, all you guys, hurry up! Yes, sir. All the loading docks.
Deputy, a bus driver tied up Dan's taking care of him. Found this by the bus driver's seat. He must have dropped it.
They really pulled it, huh?
Yeah.
No driver, no jury.
Come on through. You might as well sit down. Get comfortable. You're gonna be in here for a while.
Miss, maybe the other young lady didn't hear me when I asked before, but what happens to us if the authorities don't let your friends go?
I wouldn't worry about that, Mr. Barbado.
Mr. Barbato is supposed to worry about us. He's our jury foreman.
We have a right to know.
In time, okay?
This is as good a time as any. Right now!
All right. A set of demands is being delivered. They'll have it soon. It calls for a schedule of executions if there's no compliance or if they don't take us seriously.
Executions?
Oh, my God.
I have to go to the bathroom, please. I'm speaking to you as one of the many friends of Nick and Marie Tanninger. Their recent trial has convinced us that the American legal system is a farce, and so we've decided to hold it hostage. The Tanninger jury is now in our custody. They will live or die at our discretion until certain conditions are fulfilled. Here are the demands. The Tanningers must be released at once. You will fly them and those wishing to leave with them to a free country of our choosing. You will pay a forfeit of $5 million for the freedom of your 12 representatives. You have 33 hours to announce your compliance and to make all arrangements. At 6 p.m. tomorrow, if you've not agreed to our demands, the first of your jurors will be executed, and the rest will follow. You are now on notice. The clock is running.
Idiots! Those weirdos are gonna kill mailmen and housewives because the system buzzed them.
Free country of their choice. Where's that?
You know, it's gotta be the Rosen girl.
All right. Here you are. Susan Rosen, Arlen Washington, Gary Jelinek, Barbara Ross. Now, there's your Taninger family. We have all the investigation jackets on them right here. All the interrogation reports, everything on them except where they are right now.
Well, the ball is in your court, Mike. You handle the investigation. I'll give you all the backup you need.
And what I need from you is manpower.
Okay.
I need all the men you can spare from the detective division. All the guys in uniform ought to be in OT. Vacations canceled.
You got it. Let me fill in the chief.
City Hall's going to have to make some kind of statement. Now, as soon as what's on that tape gets onto the street, everybody's going to expect an answer.
All right, I'll have it duped. One for the mayor's office and one for the chief of police. The original stays right here with us.
Time's running.
How many copies of the photos you want?
Who knows? 50, 150. Who knows how many copies you need? There's one thing I do know, though. We've got to talk to those deputies again. The ones who were on that bus.
Lieutenant?
Yes.
I'd like to follow through on one thing, if it's okay.
What's that?
I used to work part-time down at the city bus barn, summer vacations. The drivers used to log in and log out time and mileage every day.
That's good. Then we can tell how far the bus went and narrow down the area.
Go ahead, follow through on that.
Guy's smart.
Yeah, he's got plenty up here. He's a little rough around the edges, but oh, he's loaded up here. Okay, who are we going to take with us? Marsden from Undercover. He's pretty savvy with the radical groups. Gordy Walton.
What about Fletcher?
Good man.
Oh, my God. I don't want to die like this.
We're not going to die, dear.
Yeah, sure, Mrs. Strauss. Those are toy guns those freaks are carrying. There's the deputy they shot outside the restaurant.
Oh, I don't think there's any sense in talking like that.
I think Breitbach is right. The police will find us and they'll get us out.
Police? The police are going to look here?
All right, then. We've got to try to help ourselves. If they're going to lock us up alone like this, maybe we could put together some kind of a plan.
Shh. You shouldn't talk like this. Maybe they have a microphone hidden someplace.
We can't just sit. We've got to help ourselves. We can't depend on anyone finding us here.
Boy, are we in big trouble. I've been looking at all of you, and there isn't a single person here I'd want to be stuck in an elevator with, let alone life or death. There isn't a soul in this room that's going to take on those kids.
James. James was in Vietnam. He was a soldier.
Like I said, big trouble.
All right, this is your lunch. Maybe we'll bring some coffee later. Here's the can opener.
Miss, that lady, Mrs. Whalen, she's not well, and...
She's in the restroom.
She needs insulin or something like that. Is there any way that you could get it for her?
Sure, Mr. Barber. I'll run right down to Speedy Mart.
Hey, listen.
This is a serious thing. Without medicine, Mrs. Whalen could... Well, she should have her medicine.
Well, I suggest that we just wait and see where her name falls on the list, hmm?
On what list? What list?
I was in the back on the floor, man. I heard the shots and some people scared, you know, moaning like that. Nothing else. I was pretty scared myself.
What about the traffic? Well, come on, you're a driver. You can tell there's heavy traffic. You're stopping a lot of lights. What about a cable car route? Did you feel the tracks under the tires?
No, nothing like that. Is this gonna take long? Because the TV news guys are downstairs and they want me to say something for TV, you know.
Look, Sanders, you got something to say, you tell me. 6 o'clock news, you know, they're not gonna save this jury.
Now, how about smells? Did you go by a bakery? And when you stopped, did you, smell any fresh paint? Gasoline? Try to remember. Anything at all.
I'm sorry, Lieutenant. I was too frightened. I was afraid I was going to be killed.
Homicide, Stone. Yeah, where? What time? No, Steve's got an appointment to take a run at the Tanagers. I'll take it, though. Give me the address.
Yeah, I see that you got a problem. But what I don't see is what do you think that I can do about it?
Okay, Nick, we got a situation where nobody can win, and you got 12 innocent people in between.
Nobody's that innocent. Anyway, we told you. We don't know where they are.
Okay, what about this one? The two of you go on television, you make an appeal to your family not to harm the hostages.
You're saying we can make a deal?
No, there's no deal, Nick. But I think you ought to cooperate. Look at it pragmatically. Now, all right, we've got a mistrial. But there is going to be another trial. You can count on that. Now, you can do yourself nothing but good if you get on the record now as repudiating this kidnapping.
Yeah, but what's that going to do for the people, man?
What people? What are you talking about?
Well, the people, everybody. I mean, what's going to keep the system from giving a shift to some other guys just like it did to me? What's going to happen to human rights?
Oh, Nick, you're just such a humanist, you know, and you got such a record to prove it. Armed robbery, assault, manslaughter. Why don't you just come off it, huh? Now, look, Marie, you always said you were doing this for the little guy. You said it when I busted you. You said it in court. Now, who exactly are those 12 hostages?
They are incidental.
Incidental?
What happens to them, in light of the larger issue, is unimportant. If they have to be executed to...
Executed, huh? Executed! All right, I've had it. I just had it.
Officer, your jacket.
Thank you very much. If they got anything else to say, you let me know, will you?
Oh, please, officer, don't go away mad now.
Hey, Nick, I'm not going away mad. Not mad. Hey, I'm sorry about that, Nick.
I want him busted. Banachik, you fire against him. Like hell I will. Now, you know damn well what's going to happen. Gary, Susan, Arlen, they're going to kill those 12 people. And I'm going to have to go before a judge and file for a change of venue because we can't get a fair trial in this city. I'll be denied, but in a crazy way, I'll be right. You couldn't get a fair trial in Siam, Tasmania, or anywhere else after this vile act. The two of you were the greatest argument for the death penalty I've ever seen. Yeah, someone phoned in a tip. Said they saw a truckload of people going into one of these warehouses here.
So they're trying to transfer the passengers?
What we found was a rent-a-truck and 26 hot storefront mannequins.
We figured we may as well cover the place while we're here.
How'd you do that bus mileage?
Pretty good. Bus checked in last night with 66,221 miles.
Wait a minute. They had the deputies logging it?
Yes, sir. I went to the bus and took the mileage it had when we first stopped it. It came to...
Hold it. Never mind the numbers. Just give me the miles.
14.
14 miles.
Then I retraced to where we first spotted the bus. That came to almost 5 miles from here to here.
So that leaves 9.
Right.
We got 4.5 miles where they dropped them off, the same to when the police spotted them, right?
Yeah, we spotted the bus right here for the first time. With a radius of 4 to 5 miles, that gives us a search area of between...
70 and 80 square miles.
Yes, that's right. So that's our search area.
Yeah, but that's some area. You got a few thousand houses, warehouses, condemned buildings. You got the waterfront running from here to there.
By 6 tomorrow night, it looks impossible.
Well, impossible or not, this is our search area. Come on. Yeah, we're still digging for possibilities. Now, you were with the Tanagers for months. Did they ever hide anything, or did they ever store anything where they thought they wouldn't be found?
Store what?
Anything, you know. Guns, ammunition, money, pamphlets, anything at all.
No.
How about a garage? Or an old abandoned house? An empty theater?
You know who's next, don't you?
Stiles, you've got plenty of protection.
These two detectives are with you at all
For
times.
how long? We have to do it all over again now. The trial, the testimony, everything. They're gonna have 100 different chances to kill me again. And when the next trial is over, what am I supposed to do?
They will be in jail then.
All of them?
All of them, believe me.
It's not like when Gareth was in the group and Marie was directing things. Nick took over and they all became murderers. They're gonna kill me now for giving evidence. There's no chance that they're going to let Nick and Marie
No
loose now.
chance at all. Believe me, no chance at all.
They're gonna kill me. They'll kill me in a second, just like they're gonna kill those other people. Susan's not gonna let them live. You don't know what she's like. They're gonna all be slaughtered.
And just drifted away, you know, like these kids do these days. Didn't help she didn't have a father to keep her in line. He walked out on us when Barbie was 3. It's not easy for the single parent, you know.
No, imagine it must be pretty difficult.
I have met those Tattingers. Do you know that? They've been here, right here. Nick sat where you're sitting. They just came in here with Barbie one day. They expected me to do for them. Barbie, too. They expected me to give them money.
Did you give it to them?
You better believe I did. Those people scared the life out of me. Just a sad thing when a mother is afraid of her own daughter. But I am afraid of mine. Now, Barbara, she's just not as strange as those other people. She'd never hurt anybody, but still no sense of responsibility. And then she got pregnant. The boy doesn't seem to think that he is responsible anymore. She got pregnant, I got the bills. The gynecologist, the pediatrician.
Barbara's got a baby?
Oh, yes, little girl, 3.
This child lives with Barbara?
8, 10 weeks out of the year, maybe, if it suits her. The rest of the time, she's with me.
Is she here now?
She's in the hospital.
Anything serious?
Not at first. The little tyke took cold a couple of weeks ago. The doctors put her into County General. This is some sort of a upper respiratory business infection.
Does Barbara visit her in the hospital?
No. And of course she won't now, will she? Nurses tell me that she calls from time to time, though. I'll get those bills. The hospital.
Yes, ma'am.
It won't do any good to worry about the time, Mr. Lee. What happens, happens.
We've got to get something organized. We can't just do nothing.
What do you want to do? You want to send out for a pizza?
Look, I don't think you're particularly amusing. Unless you got some reason not to be frightened out of your wits like the rest of us. You know something we don't?
What is that supposed to mean?
Nothing. He's upset, Miss Chamberlain.
You think Miss Chamberlain has something to do with them?
Figure it out yourself.
You better spell that out, mister.
Come on, come on. There's nothing to explain. What we're all hearing now is a lot of nerves falling apart. We've been together almost 14 weeks. We've gotten along okay until now.
That's true. I mean, everybody's been so nice until now. We shouldn't spoil it.
14 weeks down the toilet.
What do you mean?
Trial's over, ain't it? We give it 14 weeks. We haven't decided nothing.
I decided.
What? What would your vote have been, James?
I can sure tell you how I'd have voted.
Oh, I don't think we should talk about that. I mean, we don't know for sure.
Sure we do. Mistrial's been declared. We're out of it. We can do anything we want. Vote, anything.
All right, Phil, let's do it. Vote. Guilty.
Wrong. If you want an honest vote, it's got to be a secret vote. Especially now.
You don't think there's any question about how it's gonna go, do you?
Yeah, there might be, sure.
Really? Well, that's very interesting.
She has a point. It's got to be a regular secret vote. But we'll need paper and pencils.
I have no paper. I don't even have any more tissue.
You want paper? I'll get you paper.
Oh, I have a pencil.
You're kidding. What's the matter with it? Takes a plumber to know the many uses of this paper.
Do we write guilty or not guilty or...
Well, why do we use symbols? G or N?
Okay, G or N. And when you're done making your marking, I'll just put them all in my pocket so they won't be in any order. Everybody got their paper? Yes. Now,
This has really got to be an honest vote. What I mean is, we shouldn't vote the way we feel about them now. We've got to vote the way we would have voted before we were kidnapped.
That seems fair.
I remember exactly how I would have voted.
So do I, pal. So do I.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to have a little change of scenery. Bedtime. You can follow her, I'll follow you. Come on, move it! Pick up the lanterns. Get that lantern.
You don't look so well, Mrs. Whalen.
I've got diabetes, and I stand a good chance of being shot. What would you like? Tap dancing?
Look, maybe I can do something for you. What do you need, insulin?
No, I use oral diabetic tablets. They seem to work better than insulin. But listen, whatever, I always carry an extra prescription, just in case. Oh, God, do you think you could get some help for me tonight?
Yeah, maybe tonight.
Oh, God bless you.
All right, get in faster. Just keep moving to the back.
Come on, people, move it.
Come on, you have plenty of time to look around later. Just keep moving to the back.
All right, this is where you sleep, so make yourselves comfortable. You can split up, men, women, or whatever. There's a couple of toilets back there, and one of us will be behind this door, so don't open it. Believe me, don't open it.
We'll be taking you out tomorrow. And, well, good night.
I'd give my left ear for a cigarette right now. I'd give both ears for welding tanks and a cutting torch.
Should we just take whichever bets we want?
We could vote on it like we did for restaurants if you want to make a production out of it.
Hey, speaking of voting,
Yeah,
what about...
Why don't we count them votes? Yeah, Barbato, count them.
Well, how'd it come out?
Come on, what's the count?
Guilty, 10. 2 not guilty.
Not guilty? 2?
Not guilty.
Well, now we know. I suggest we all go Betty-bye.
She got some kind of respiratory infection.
Does Barbara Ross know that? Yes, sir. We checked pediatrics. She's called twice now.
So we thought we could control the phones.
We'll get the phones controlled.
You need the hospital's permission.
We've got it, sir. We talked to the administrator. He says under the circumstances, they'll go with us.
That's the best thing I've heard today. How long does it take to set up?
It's already been done. See, the head nurse has agreed that if Barbara calls, she'll tell her the doctor's with her child. Then she has to call back.
Okay, this is how I want to play it. We'll get in touch with Marsden. He and I will take the first shift at the hospital. The two of you go out in the street. I want every unmarked car with a photo of Barbara Ross. We'll cover this whole city and cover it good.
Yes, about 2 degrees up since morning, Doctor. Yes, we're continuing the IV drip. Yes, sir. Thank you. Pediatrics, Nurse Summers. I see, yes, you say you're a friend of the family. Fine, just let me get the child's chart. One moment, please.
But I don't understand. Why is the doctor there now? It's late. Is there any kind of trouble? Is she worse? Well, could you check, please?
Payphone. 900 block Montgomery.
900 block Montgomery, payphone.
Repeat, all units. Contact made, 900 block Montgomery. Public telephone.
This is 81. I'm on it 3 blocks away.
Look, I'm sorry. I just can't wait. I'll call back tomorrow.
Barbara?
Another black and white. Where's the ambulance?
Any second, Dan. It's on its way. How bad? Where's he hit?
Chest wound really bad. Looks like it's near the heart.
Anybody call an ambulance?
Yes, sir, I did.
Well, we're not going to wait any longer. Open the back door of that car. Let me have your partner in a lead car. Yes, sir. Come on. The two of you stay here. Call in the crew. Yes, sir.
In the autumn of 1972, when San Francisco still smelled of salt, gasoline, and unresolved dreams, Inspector Mike Stone learned that the city could whisper murder as softly as a hummed jazz from a late-night bar. And it began on a fog-heavy morning when the Bay Bridge looked like a half-erased pencil line, and a young couple was found dead in their apartment near Russian Hill, posed with an almost theatrical calm that unsettled even the seasoned officers who first arrived. Their faces serene, their wrists bound with silk scarves instead of rope, their stereos still spinning a vinyl record that clicked and popped like a nervous heartbeat, and Stone stood in the doorway with his coat collar turned up, reading the room the way other men read books, noticing the lack of forced entry, the careful symmetry of the scene, the message written not in blood but in intention, because whoever had done this had wanted to be understood, and that was always the dangerous kind, the kind who killed, not for necessity, but for sensation, for the electric jolt of control, and Stone felt the old familiar tightening behind his eyes, the signal that the case was already inside him, already working its way through his thoughts, and behind him Inspector Steve Keller, younger, broader, with a Midwestern steadiness that contrasted Stone's more intuitive sharpness, took in the scene with quiet focus, asking practical questions of the uniforms while Stone let his mind drift, connecting textures, the faint smell of expensive cologne that didn't belong to the victims, the way the curtains were half drawn as if the killer wanted an audience but not too much light, and Stone thought of the city itself, how San Francisco could be intimate and anonymous at the same time, a place where a man could disappear into a crowd or into himself, and this killer had done both, leaving behind a tableau that felt less like a crime and more like a calling card. And when Keller finally joined him, lowering his voice, he said it felt wrong. Not sloppy wrong, but deliberate wrong. Like someone playing a game with rules only they understood. And Stone nodded, because he felt it too. That sense of choreography, of timing, as if the murders were beats in a larger rhythm that hadn't finished playing yet. And as they stepped out onto the street, the fog lifting just enough to reveal the city stretching out in layers of concrete and color, Stone knew this wasn't going to be a case you closed neatly with a report and a coffee. This was going to be a case that followed you home, that sat with you at dinner, that made you listen more closely to footsteps behind you, and already the press vans were arriving, hungry for spectacle, and Stone could almost hear the headlines forming. Something about thrill killings, about a city on edge, about fear dressed up as mystery, and later that day, when another body turned up in the Mission District, this time a middle-aged man found in his car with no visible wounds and a smile frozen on his face like a mask. The pattern began to suggest itself, not in the obvious ways the textbooks promised, but in the negative spaces, the gaps between logic, because there was no single weapon, no consistent victim profile, only the shared element of staging, of presentation, and Keller suggested maybe it was multiple killers copying each other, but Stone shook his head, because imitation lacked the confidence he sensed here. This felt singular, obsessive, and when they reviewed the timelines, Stone noticed how the murders aligned with moments of public distraction, a parade, a power outage, a baseball game that drew the city's attention elsewhere. And he wondered if the killer wasn't just killing people, but competing with the city itself, testing whether they could commit acts of ultimate intimacy without being seen. And that night, as Stone drove home through streets slick with mist, he replayed the scenes in his mind, the calm faces, the deliberate placements, and he thought about San Francisco's reputation as a city of freedom, of experimentation, and how easily freedom could tip into indulgence, into cruelty when boundaries dissolved. And he remembered an old case from years back, a man who confessed not because he felt guilty, but because he was bored, and Stone felt the same chill now. That sense of someone out there chasing sensation, chasing the rush that came from ending a life and arranging it just so, and the next morning brought a letter, delivered to the precinct in a plain envelope, no return address, inside a single page typed cleanly with no fingerprints, the words brief and almost polite, saying simply that the city should pay attention, that the killings were not random, that they were a response to something unseen. And Keller read it twice before looking up, asking Stone what he thought. And Stone said he thought they were being invited, not to solve a crime, but to witness a performance, and that worried him more than any threat, because performances demanded escalation. And as the days passed, the murders continued, each one different, each one carefully framed, and the public began to feel it, the unease settling into conversations, into the way people locked their doors earlier, watched each other longer, and Stone and Keller found themselves moving through the city like men chasing a shadow that knew all the shortcuts, interviewing witnesses who had seen nothing and suspects who wanted to be seen too much. And in quiet moments, Stone would stand by the window of his office, looking out at the hills, thinking about how killers like this didn't see themselves as monsters. They saw themselves as authors, writing stories with bodies instead of words. And Stone knew that to catch him, they would have to read the story faster than it was being written, and that meant understanding not just how he killed, but why the act thrilled him, why the risk mattered more than the result. And somewhere out there, the killer was listening, watching the city react, feeling the surge of power that came from being both invisible and infamous. And Stone felt the pressure building, the sense that the opening act was nearly over, and whatever came next would be louder, bolder, impossible to ignore, because thrill killers never stopped when they were satisfied. They stopped when they were stopped, and San Francisco, with all its beauty and contradictions, had just become the stage. By the time the second week unfolded, San Francisco had begun to feel like a city, holding its breath, and Inspector Mike Stone could sense it in the smallest details, in the way bartenders glanced at the door when it opened, in the way couples argued in hushed tones on street corners, as if fear itself might be listening. And inside the Hall of Justice, the atmosphere had tightened into something brittle, because 3 more victims had been found in 3 different neighborhoods, each death distinct in method yet eerily consistent in intent, each scene arranged with the same quiet confidence, the same refusal to rush. And Stone found himself studying photographs late into the night, not just looking for clues, but for cadence, for rhythm, because this killer moved like a musician, varying tempo and volume while keeping the underlying melody intact, and Steve Keller, sitting across from him with sleeves rolled up and coffee gone cold, finally broke the silence by saying the victims had nothing in common on paper, different ages, professions, social circles, but Stone replied that paper lied, that the truth was usually buried in behavior, not statistics, and when they began reconstructing the victims' last 48 hours, patterns began to surface like shapes and fog. Each victim had spent time in public spaces before their deaths, bars, theaters, busy streets, moments when they'd been briefly unguarded, briefly anonymous, and Stone realized the killer wasn't just choosing victims. He was choosing moments, exploiting the city's natural rhythm, stepping in when attention shifted elsewhere. And that idea was confirmed when a witness finally emerged, a woman who remembered seeing a man help one of the victims carry groceries up a stairwell. Polite, forgettable, the kind of man you wouldn't remember unless you tried. And that detail lodged itself in Stone's mind, because forgettable was a weapon, anonymity sharpened into strategy, and as Keller arranged for composite sketches, Stone focused on the letter again, rereading the careful phrasing, the absence of overt anger, the almost academic tone, and he wondered if the killer was less driven by rage than by curiosity, by the desire to see how far he could go before the city truly noticed him. And when the media dubbed the unknown murderer the thrill killer, the name spread faster than the facts, and Stone knew that names were dangerous because they gave killers a shape, a brand, something to live up to, and sure enough, the next murder came with escalation, a public setting this time. A man found dead in a cable car after midnight, his body slumped peacefully against the wooden bench, discovered only when the car reached the depot, and the audacity of it sent a jolt through the department, because this wasn't just murder, it was intrusion, the killer stepping into a shared civic space and claiming it. And as Stone stood inside the silent cable car, the city lights blurred beyond the windows, he felt a flicker of anger cut through his usual restraint, because this was no longer just a puzzle, it was a challenge, and Keller sensed it too, suggesting they push harder on surveillance, on informants, on anyone who thrived on notoriety. But Stone cautioned patience, because killers like this fed on reaction, and giving them too much attention too fast could accelerate the violence. Yet even as he said it, he knew the balance was slipping, the city demanding answers faster than the case could provide them. And late one evening, while reviewing transit logs, Stone noticed something small but persistent, a series of maintenance requests filed near several of the crime scenes in the weeks prior, all signed off by the same inspector, a name that appeared unremarkable, buried in paperwork, but Stone circled it anyway, because killers often hid in systems, in routines that granted them access without scrutiny, and when they looked into it, they found the man had recently resigned, citing stress, leaving behind an apartment that was already cleared out, the timing too neat to ignore, and Keller wanted to issue a bulletin, but Stone hesitated, because the absence itself felt deliberate, like another staged scene, and as they dug deeper, they uncovered a trail of small performances, pranks almost, staged accidents, false reports, moments when this man had manipulated attention years before the murders began, testing boundaries, rehearsing control, and Stone began to see the killer not as someone newly awakened, but as someone who had been practicing for a long time, refining his sense of timing, his understanding of how people looked without seeing. And that night, as fog rolled back over the city, Stone received another letter, this one hand-delivered to his home, slipped through the mail slot sometime between dusk and midnight, and the intimacy of it sent a cold wave through him, because this wasn't about publicity anymore. It was personal, the letter referencing details that hadn't been released, small observations about Stone's habits, his route home, the way he paused before unlocking his door, and though there was no direct threat, the message was clear. The killer was close enough to watch, close enough to study him the way Stone studied crime scenes, and Keller reacted with anger when Stone showed him the letter the next morning, insisting on protection, on moving Stone temporarily, but Stone refused, because retreat would signal fear, and fear was exactly what the killer wanted to provoke, and instead Stone leaned into the discomfort, retracing his steps, changing routines just enough to observe without being predictable, and in doing so, he began to notice how often he passed the same faces, the same commuters, the same anonymous figures who shared his daily patterns, and he wondered how many potential killers the city carried quietly, how many people learned to disappear in plain sight. And as the investigation narrowed, pressure mounted, the mayor demanding progress, the press speculating wildly, and another body was found, this time accompanied by a note that simply read, "Are you watching now?" And Stone knew the second act was over. The killer no longer content with subtlety, demanding acknowledgement, demanding engagement, and as Stone stood over the body, the city humming on around them, he felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders, because this wasn't just about catching a murderer anymore. It was about reclaiming the city's sense of safety, about proving that attention could be reclaimed from someone who had learned to weaponize it, and Stone understood that to end this, he would have to step into the performance, anticipate the next move, and risk becoming part of the story the killer was so carefully writing. The third phase of the investigation began not with a body, but with silence, a pause so deliberate it unsettled Mike Stone more than the previous escalations, because killers who thrived on sensation rarely stopped unless they were planning something larger. And as days passed without another death, the city's anxiety didn't ease. It fermented, turning inward, and Stone felt it walking through neighborhoods where conversations cut off when a stranger approached, where laughter sounded forced, like people were testing whether joy was still allowed. And inside the precinct, the task force worked longer hours, chasing down every thin lead, every name that surfaced from transit records, maintenance logs, and anonymous tips, yet nothing solidified, and Stone began to understand that the killer had shifted tactics, moving from action to anticipation, letting fear do the work for him. And in those quiet days, Stone reviewed the killer's history as they now understood it, not just the murders, but the years of rehearsal beforehand, the false alarms, the staged mishaps, the subtle manipulations of attention, and he saw a man obsessed, not with death itself, but with response, with the way people looked, reacted, adjusted, and that insight reframed everything, because it meant the killer would eventually return, not randomly, but at a moment engineered for maximum impact, and Keller, increasingly restless, pushed for broader measures, more patrols, more visibility, arguing that deterrence mattered. But Stone countered that deterrence only worked on men who feared consequences, and this killer feared insignificance more than prison. And the debate between them sharpened but never broke, because they trusted each other enough to disagree. And late one night, while reviewing a map dotted with pins marking every known incident connected to the suspect, Stone noticed something that had escaped them before. The locations formed not a cluster or a pattern of convenience, but a loose arc, curving through the city like a route, not a random path, but a journey. And when Stone overlaid the city's historic trolley lines and walking tours, the alignment became clearer. The murders traced a narrative route through San Francisco, touching landmarks both famous and forgotten, as if the killer were guiding an invisible audience through his version of the city. And that realization hit Stone hard, because it meant the killer was telling a story, one that moved spatially as well as psychologically. And if that was true, then the next location wasn't arbitrary. It was inevitable, and Stone and Keller spent hours debating where the route led next, what symbolic stop the killer might choose, a place that balanced visibility with intimacy, history with anonymity. And Stone kept returning to the same thought, that the killer wanted to be seen without being recognized, to stand in places where thousands had stood before, dissolving into collective memory. And the answer finally came not from the map, but from a forgotten case file Stone pulled from storage, an old unsolved death from years earlier, ruled accidental, a man found dead near a scenic overlook, no signs of struggle, no witnesses, the file thin, unremarkable, but the location matched the arc perfectly, and Stone felt a chill as he realized this might not have been the killer's first act, but his first successful one, the moment he learned he could take a life and let it vanish into the city's indifference. And if that place mattered to him, if it was the origin of his transformation, Then returning to it would be more than escalation. It would be homage. And Stone ordered discreet surveillance of the Overlook, resisting Keller's instinct to flood it with uniforms, because subtlety mattered now more than ever, and for 2 nights nothing happened, the city breathing around them, fog rolling in and out like a living thing, and Stone began to worry that he'd misread the narrative, that he was projecting meaning where none existed, until the 3rd night, when a call came in just before dawn. A jogger had found a woman unconscious near the edge, alive but barely, her pulse faint, her wrists bound loosely, intentionally, as if the killer had stopped himself mid-act, and Stone arrived to find the scene incomplete. No theatrical posing, no message, just absence, and that disturbed him deeply, because it suggested hesitation, or worse, intention redirected. And at the hospital, the woman survived, unable to remember her attacker's face, only his voice, calm, instructive, telling her to breathe, to stay still, as if he were guiding her through an exercise rather than preparing to end her life. And that detail confirmed Stone's growing belief that the killer's thrill came not from violence, but from control, from orchestrating another person's fear and relief. And by sparing her, he had introduced a new variable, mercy, or at least the illusion of it, and the media seized on. The story, speculating wildly about remorse, about cracks in the killer's psyche. But Stone knew better, because sparing a victim wasn't weakness, it was complexity. It was the killer rewriting his own rules to stay ahead. And that afternoon Stone received another letter, shorter than the others, containing only a time and a place, no threat, no explanation. And Keller argued it was a trap, that no rational killer would invite direct contact, unless he wanted confrontation. But Stone read it differently, seeing it as the next chapter in the performance, a controlled interaction, and after long debate with his superiors, Stone was allowed to go, discreetly monitored but alone, because the killer had specified one person, and breaking that condition might end the dialogue entirely. And as Stone walked to the designated cafe, a small, unremarkable place near the waterfront, he felt the city watching him back, every passerby a potential observer, every reflection in glass a reminder of how exposed he was. And inside the cafe, he ordered coffee and waited, forcing himself into stillness, and minutes stretched until a man sat at the opposite table, not dramatic, not threatening, just present, and Stone knew instantly this was him. Not from any physical tell, but from the way the man looked at the room, attentive yet detached, as if cataloging reactions rather than participating. And their conversation was brief, almost banal, discussing the weather, the view, the city's changes, and beneath it all a current of mutual assessment. And the man spoke of San Francisco as a place that taught people how to vanish, how to be surrounded and unseen. And Stone listened, choosing his words carefully, aware that every response was part of the test. And when the man finally stood to leave, he said only that the story was nearing its end, that Stone should be ready, and then he was gone, merging into the morning crowd without urgency. And Stone sat there long after, heart steady but mind racing, because now the killer had crossed a line, collapsing the distance between hunter and hunted. And Stone knew the next move would be decisive, either a final act meant to eclipse everything before it or a calculated surrender designed to control the ending. And as he walked back into the city's noise, Stone felt the weight of authorship settle on him too, because now the question wasn't just how to catch the killer, but how to end the story without giving him the climax he craved. And in that tension, between justice and spectacle, Stone understood that the final chapters would demand restraint as much as resolve, because sometimes the greatest denial you could offer a thrill killer was not attention, not fear, but silence. After the cafe encounter, Mike Stone felt as though the city had subtly shifted its weight, not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to notice, but just enough that every familiar street seemed slightly off balance, as if San Francisco itself were adjusting to accommodate a secret now shared by only 2 men. And in the days that followed, Stone spoke little about the meeting, even to Keller, choosing instead to let the experience settle, because he understood instinctively that, Overanalyzing it too quickly would flatten its meaning, and meaning was the killer's currency, the one thing he guarded more carefully than his identity. And yet the effects of that brief conversation rippled outward, manifesting in small but telling ways. The sudden absence of letters, the halt in theatrical killings, the city left in a suspended state where fear had no new image to attach itself to. And Stone knew this pause was intentional, a recalibration, the killer reassessing the audience reaction now that the boundary between fiction and reality had thinned, and Keller, watching Stone more closely than he admitted, sensed the shift too, noting how Stone lingered longer at windows, how his questions and briefings became more philosophical, less about procedure and more about motive. And when Keller finally pressed him, Stone shared only what mattered, that the killer didn't want chaos. He wanted coherence, a narrative that made sense to him even if it terrified everyone else. And this reframed the task force's approach, because instead of asking where the killer might strike next, they began asking what the killer needed next to sustain the story he was telling himself. And that question led them not outward into the city, but inward into institutional memory, into past cases that had been quietly closed, mislabeled, forgotten. And as they combed through decades of files, Stone noticed a recurring theme: incidents dismissed because they lacked obvious malice, deaths chalked up to accidents or natural causes despite faint inconsistencies. And he began to suspect that the killer had been operating beneath the threshold of attention for years, perfecting his invisibility, choosing victims whose disappearances or deaths would ripple only briefly before being absorbed by the city's constant motion. And this realization cast the recent murders in a new light, not as the beginning of a spree, but as a reveal, the moment when the killer decided the city was finally ready to see him. And that decision itself suggested a trigger, some internal shift, some perceived insult or awakening that transformed patience into performance. And Stone hypothesized that the trigger might not be external at all but relational. The killer realizing that anonymity alone was no longer thrilling, that to be truly powerful he needed resistance, recognition, a worthy observer. And that observer had become Stone, not by chance but by design, because Stone's reputation for quiet persistence, for understanding criminals without romanticizing them, made him the ideal counterpart, someone who would engage without feeding hysteria. And when Keller voiced concern that Stone was becoming too central to the case, Stone didn't deny it, instead acknowledging the danger while insisting that stepping away now would only hand control back to the killer. And as tension mounted within the department, another incident occurred. Not a murder, but a disruption, a staged emergency. At a downtown theater during a sold-out performance, the audience evacuated amid confusion, panic contained but palpable. And later it was discovered that the threat had been carefully engineered to appear real, while ensuring no one was harmed. A rehearsal of fear rather than its execution, and Stone immediately recognized it as a message. The killer demonstrating that he could still manipulate large groups, still command attention without crossing into overt violence, and that restraint was itself a form of dominance. And the press struggled with the story, unsure how to frame an event that felt dangerous but left no victims, and Stone took grim satisfaction in that confusion, because it meant the killer wasn't getting the clean narrative payoff he wanted. And yet Stone also knew this balance couldn't hold indefinitely, that eventually the killer would escalate again if only to prove he still could. And the question became not whether another life would be taken, but whose, and when, and whether Stone could intervene at the moment when intention crystallized into action. And to that end, he began retracing the killer's likely psychological arc, mapping moments of perceived invisibility against moments of assertion. And he noticed that the killer's most significant acts aligned with times when institutions failed him, when complaints were dismissed, when evaluations minimized his concerns, suggesting a man who felt erased by systems he once believed in. And this led Stone to consider the killer's former roles, the access positions he had held, the subtle authority that came with maintenance, inspection, oversight, jobs that allowed observation without engagement. And in that context, the killings took on a distorted logic, each act a reclamation of agency, a way of forcing the world to respond. And Keller, absorbing this analysis, voiced a fear Stone shared but hadn't articulated, that the killer might be preparing an ending that reframed everything. An act that would retroactively redefine the earlier murders, turning them into prologue rather than climax. And this fear deepened when Stone received yet another communication, this one indirect, a short passage printed in a local paper's classifieds, innocuous on the surface but unmistakable to Stone in its phrasing, referencing choice, authorship, and the idea that endings were the only honest part of any story. And Stone understood that the killer was signaling not location but intention, announcing that the final act was being drafted. And in response, Stone made a controversial decision, requesting that certain information be withheld from the public, not to protect the department, but to starve the killer of reactive material. And though this drew criticism internally and from the press, Stone held firm, believing that silence, carefully applied, could become a strategic tool. And as days passed without further incident, the city's fear began to blur into fatigue, vigilance, dulling at the edges, and Stone worried that complacency might serve the killer just as well as panic, because it would provide cover. And then, one evening, Keller received a call from an old contact, a man who claimed to have known someone fitting their suspect profile years ago, a man obsessed with observation, with crowd behavior, who believed cities reveal their true selves only when they thought no one was watching. And as Keller relayed this to Stone, Stone felt a tightening of focus, because it echoed too precisely to be coincidence, and they arranged a discreet meeting, aware that even this step might be anticipated, might be folded into the killer's design. And as Stone prepared, reviewing what little they had, he reflected on the strange intimacy of the pursuit, how chasing a mind required opening your own, how easy it was to slip from understanding into identification if you weren't careful. And he resolved again to keep his center, to remember the victims whose lives had been reduced to symbols in someone else's narrative. And when night fell over San Francisco, lights blooming across hills and bridges, Stone felt the approach of something definitive, not with dread but with a sober clarity, because whatever came next would test not just his ability to catch a killer, but his resolve to deny that killer the meaning he so desperately sought. And in that quiet resolve, Stone understood that the true battle was no longer about control of the city, but about control of the ending. The meeting with Keller's old contact took place in a narrow diner south of Market, a place that survived by being forgettable, where the coffee tasted burned and the fluorescent lights flattened every face into anonymity. And Mike Stone chose it precisely because it felt like neutral ground, the kind of environment where stories slipped out not because people trusted you, but because they assumed no one important would ever listen. And the man they were meeting arrived early, sitting with his back to the wall, fingers wrapped around a mug he didn't drink from, his eyes scanning reflections in the window more often than the door. And before he even spoke, Stone recognized the posture, the quiet vigilance of someone who had spent years watching rather than participating. And when Keller introduced them, the man nodded without smiling, launching almost immediately into a monologue about a former co-worker from years ago, a man whose name he barely remembered, but whose habits had left an impression, because this man had been fascinated by patterns of movement, by how crowds formed and dissolved, by how long it took people to notice when something was out of place. And he spoke of conversations where this co-worker had speculated casually, almost academically, about how easily systems could be manipulated, how emergencies could be staged to test reactions without causing harm. And Stone listened intently, not interrupting, allowing the story to unfold at its own pace, because he knew that memory responded better to patience than pressure. And as details accumulated, Stone felt the shape of their suspect grow clearer, not in physical terms but psychological ones. A man who believed that observation granted moral distance, that watching exempted him from responsibility. And when the contact described how this co-worker had once engineered a fake gas leak evacuation just to see how supervisors responded, Stone felt a jolt of recognition, seeing the early draft of the theater incident in that anecdote. And when asked why he hadn't reported it at the time, the man shrugged, saying it hadn't seemed dangerous, just strange, and Stone filed that away. because just strange was often where dangerous things incubated. And as the meeting ended, the contact provided a last piece of information, a name that might not be current but was close enough to start digging. And as Stone and Keller stepped back into the street, the city noise felt louder, sharper, as if the fog itself were listening, and Keller, energized by the tangible lead, talked through next steps, background checks, employment records, known addresses, but Stone was quieter, his thoughts circling a different question, not who the killer was, but who he believed himself to be, because understanding that self-concept would determine how the story ended. And back at the precinct, the name led them down a narrow corridor of records, employment files from city departments, evaluations that praised reliability, while noting interpersonal detachment, comments about initiative taken without authorization, a pattern of someone competent enough to avoid scrutiny, but distant enough to avoid connection. And Stone noticed how often the word independent appeared, framed as a strength, and he wondered how often institutions mistook isolation for self-sufficiency. And as the file grew thicker, Stone began to see the internal logic of the killer's evolution. A man rewarded for invisibility, promoted for not making waves, who slowly learned that being unseen was power, until one day invisibility stopped being enough. And that hunger for recognition twisted into performance, and Keller, reviewing the same material, voiced what Stone had been thinking, that the killer's escalation wasn't about losing control, but about reclaiming authorship, about rewriting a life that felt edited down by bureaucracy and indifference, and that insight reframed the urgency, because a man who saw himself as an author wouldn't end his story quietly. He would craft a conclusion that justified everything that came before. And as if in response to their progress, another incident occurred that night, subtle but chilling, a coordinated series of false emergency calls across 3 neighborhoods, timed precisely to overwhelm dispatch without causing panic, a demonstration of reach rather than violence, and Stone recognized it as another chapter. The killer reminding them that he was still directing the tempo, and Stone argued against immediate public disclosure, believing that naming the tactic would only validate it. But internally he felt the pressure intensify, because this was no longer just about stopping future harm, it was about preventing a final act that could redefine public trust. And as Stone reviewed the false call logs, he noticed the precision of timing again, the careful spacing, the way each call exploited procedural delays. And he saw not chaos, but discipline, a man who respected systems even as he subverted them. And that paradox troubled Stone deeply, because it meant the killer wasn't nihilistic. He was principled in his own distorted way, and principles made men stubborn. And late that night, Stone drove the city alone, not chasing a lead but absorbing the environment, because he believed context mattered as much as evidence. And as he passed through neighborhoods touched by the case, he saw how life had adapted, people cautious but still moving, still living. And he wondered whether the killer saw this resilience as failure or success, whether the continued pulse of the city diminished his sense of impact. And when Stone returned home, another message waited. Not a letter this time, but package, left with deliberate care. Inside a stack of photographs, surveillance-style images of public spaces at different times of day, each one subtly annotated with notes about crowd density, response time, sightlines, and Stone felt a cold clarity settle in, because this was no threat. It was a draft, the killer sharing his research, inviting critique or acknowledgement, and Keller, when shown the photos, reacted with anger, insisting this crossed into provocation. But Stone saw something else, an insecurity creeping in, the killer needing validation that his work was being seen by the one person he respected as an audience, and Stone decided to exploit that need, proposing a controlled response, a message crafted to acknowledge without praising, to engage without validating. And though his superiors were wary, they agreed that silence now might read as dismissal, which could provoke something more destructive, and the response was published discreetly, a neutral statement emphasizing vigilance without sensationalism. And Stone waited, watching for reaction, and days passed with no new incidents, the city settling into an uneasy equilibrium, and Stone felt both relief and dread. because equilibrium meant the killer was thinking, revising, and when the next move came, it would be deliberate, and that sense was confirmed when Stone received a final communication for the week, a single sentence that lingered in his mind long after he read it, stating that endings were most powerful when they felt inevitable, and Stone understood that inevitability was the illusion he needed to break, that the killer wanted the city to believe this conclusion was Puritan, unstoppable, and Stone resolved then that his task was not just to arrest a man, but to interrupt a narrative, to introduce unpredictability at the precise moment when the killer believed he had accounted for everything. And as Stone stood in his office, looking out over the city lights, he felt the weight of that responsibility settle fully, because now the story had narrowed, the circle tightening, and the next part would not be about discovery but confrontation, about forcing a choice on a man who believed choice belonged only to him, and in that looming confrontation, Stone knew that patience, empathy, and restraint would be as critical as force, because thrill killers did not fear capture as much as they feared irrelevance, and the only true victory would be denying him the ending he had so carefully designed. The confrontation Stone had anticipated did not arrive as a dramatic clash or a sudden confession, but as a slow tightening of circumstance, a narrowing of possibilities that made every ordinary moment feel weighted with intention. And in the days following the last message, San Francisco slipped into a strange calm, the kind that only comes when people grow tired of being afraid and decide, consciously or not, to live anyway. And Stone watched the shift with mixed feelings, because resilience could be read two ways, either as a quiet victory over terror or as an invitation for escalation. And he suspected the killer would read it as the latter, interpreting the city's persistence as indifference, and indifference was the one thing he could not tolerate, and Keller sensed the same tension, pushing for more aggressive action now that they had a probable identity. But Stone urged restraint, arguing that moving too fast would collapse the carefully constructed dynamic they had established, because the killer was no longer operating in the dark, he was operating in relation to Stone, adjusting his actions based on perceived attention. And to disrupt that, Stone believed they needed to introduce uncertainty without provocation, a difficult balance that left little margin for error. And as they quietly surveilled addresses linked to the suspect's past, nothing obvious surfaced, no dramatic movements, no preparations that fit the department's expectations of a final act. And that absence gnawed at Stone, because killers like this did not simply stop, they transformed, and Stone began to wonder whether the ending the killer envisioned might not involve another body at all, but something more symbolic, an act that would wound the city's sense of order rather than its population. And that theory gained traction when Stone noticed a shift in the photographs the killer had sent, subtle at first, but undeniable, the annotations now focusing less on people and more on processes, on response chains, decision points, moments when authority hesitated, and Stone realized the killer's target might not be individuals anymore, but systems, the structures that had once dismissed him, overlooked him. And in that shift lay both danger and opportunity, because while systemic disruption could cause widespread harm, it also required coordination that left traces, and Stone ordered a deeper analysis of recent infrastructure tests, drills, and maintenance schedules, looking for patterns that mirrored the killer's meticulous timing. And Keller, initially skeptical, came around when they discovered a series of innocuous permit requests filed under different names, but following the same linguistic quirks as the killer's previous communications. And the requests all related to temporary access, short windows where oversight was minimal, and Stone felt a grim admiration for the elegance of it, because it wasn't illegal, just opportunistic, and it highlighted again how easily complex systems could be navigated by someone patient enough to learn their blind spots. And as Stone pieced together these fragments, he began to see the outline of the killer's intended finale, not a spectacular act of violence, but a demonstration, a controlled failure designed to expose vulnerability, to force the city to acknowledge how fragile its confidence really was. And Stone knew that if the killer succeeded, even without casualties, the psychological impact could eclipse everything that had come before. reframing the murders as mere prelude to a larger point about control and authorship. And that possibility hardened Stone's resolve, because while the killer sought meaning, Stone's responsibility was to protect the city from becoming a prop in someone else's philosophy. And to do that, he would have to anticipate the moment when the killer believed he had achieved inevitability and interrupt it quietly, decisively, without spectacle. And that meant drawing the killer closer, tightening the focus until escape routes narrowed. And Stone made a calculated decision to leak a specific piece of information, subtle enough to appear accidental, suggesting that the department was misreading the killer's intent, focusing too narrowly on physical harm. And the effect was immediate. Another message appeared within days, sharper in tone, correcting the implied misunderstanding, emphasizing that harm was not the point, that revelation was, and Stone recognized the irritation beneath the composure. The killers need to be understood accurately, and that reaction confirmed Stone's theory, giving him leverage, because now the killer was engaged not just emotionally but intellectually, invested in steering the narrative, and Stone leaned into that, crafting internal strategies around containment rather than confrontation, ensuring that critical systems had redundancies, that potential failure points were quietly reinforced, not announced, not dramatized, and Keller coordinated with city departments under the guise of routine preparedness, careful not to tip off the killer that his plan was being anticipated. And as this quiet fortification unfolded, Stone reflected on how different this pursuit felt from earlier cases, how the absence of overt violence created a moral ambiguity that complicated every decision, because stopping a murder was straightforward compared to stopping an idea. And the killer's idea, however distorted, was coherent enough to attract attention if realized, and Stone understood that his role was not to debate philosophy, but to deny platform, to prevent the idea from manifesting in a way that granted it legitimacy. And this required patience that tested even Stone's composure, because every day without resolution risked normalizing the tension, allowing both the city and the killer to settle into a prolonged standoff. And that standoff broke unexpectedly when Keller received a call from a city engineer, someone who had noticed unusual inquiries about emergency response simulations, questions that probed just deep enough to feel off. And when Stone reviewed the notes, he recognized the killer's voice again, not literally but stylistically, the same precision, the same curiosity disguised as professionalism. And this lead pointed to a specific window of time, an upcoming citywide drill scheduled months in advance, an event that would involve coordinated responses across departments. And Stone felt the pieces align, because the drill offered the perfect stage, public enough to matter, controlled enough to avoid casualties, and primed to demonstrate systemic fragility if subtly manipulated. And Stone moved quickly now, not with arrests but with anticipation, adjusting the drill's parameters quietly, introducing unpredictability into the response chain, ensuring that any attempt to exploit assumptions would fail. And he did so without canceling the event, because cancellation would signal fear, and fear would validate the killer's worldview. And as the date approached, Stone felt the familiar tightening of focus that came before resolution, the sense that all his earlier patience was being distilled into a single test. And the night before the drill, Stone received one last message, brief and almost gentle, expressing confidence that the city would finally see what it needed to see. And Stone read it without anger, without fear, only a clear-eyed determination, because he understood, now that the killer's greatest vulnerability was his certainty, his belief that he had accounted for every variable, including Stone, and Stone resolved to prove him wrong not with force but with refusal, by letting the drill proceed smoothly, by denying the disruption its intended impact, by turning the killer's meticulous preparation into an exercise in irrelevance. And as dawn broke over San Francisco, the city unaware of how much was riding on the day's quiet routines, Stone took his place, not at the center of action, but at its periphery, watching, listening, ready to intervene only if necessary, because the truest defeat he could offer the killer was not capture alone but anticlimax, the collapse of a story that had depended entirely on reaction. And as the drill began and unfolded without incident, Stone felt a cautious relief, knowing this was not the end yet, but a turning point, because now the killer would have to face the one outcome he had never planned for, a world that continued without acknowledging his authorship. And in that realization lay the beginning of the end, not dramatic, not violent, but profoundly disempowering, and Stone understood that the next phase would not be about spectacle but surrender, whether voluntary or forced, because once inevitability was broken, the only question left was how much silence the killer could endure before revealing himself. And Stone was prepared to wait, because patience, he knew, was the one tool the killer could never fully master. The failure of the drill to produce spectacle did not announce itself with anger or immediate retaliation, and that, more than anything, unsettled Mike Stone, because men who built their identities on authorship rarely accepted editorial rejection without revision. And in the days that followed the citywide exercise, San Francisco slipped back into its usual rhythms with almost insulting ease. Buses running on time, radios chattering about sports and weather, the brief moment of collective attention dissolving into forgetfulness, and Stone understood that this quiet continuity was precisely what the killer had not planned for, because the narrative he had been shaping depended on rupture, on visible acknowledgement, and without it, the story stalled. And Stone watched closely for signs of rupture within the man himself, signs that the pressure of irrelevance was beginning to crack the careful composure he had maintained for so long. And those signs appeared not as violence, but as impatience, subtle but telling, in the form of hurried communications, minor inconsistencies in tone, an urgency that hadn't been there before, and Keller noticed it too, remarking that the killer's latest messages lacked the earlier elegance, the measured cadence that suggested confidence, and Stone agreed, because desperation always rushed the prose, and that was the opening they had been waiting for, the moment when the killer's need to be understood outweighed his discipline, and Stone decided to apply pressure, not by pursuing him physically, but by compressing his narrative space, narrowing the range of interpretations available to him. And he did this by guiding internal discussions toward the possibility that the killings and disruptions had not been the work of a mastermind, but of someone improvising, someone whose plans had failed repeatedly. And though these discussions were meant to stay within the department, Stone knew enough about institutional leaks to understand that ideas traveled, and sure enough, within days, a columnist floated the notion that the so-called thrill killer might be losing control, that recent events suggested miscalculation rather than brilliance, and Stone read the piece carefully, noting the way it reframed the story, shifting power away from the killer and back toward the city. And almost immediately, the response came, another message, longer this time, defensive in places, insisting on intentionality, on the difference between restraint and failure, and Stone felt a grim satisfaction because the killer had taken the bait, revealing how deeply he needed the narrative to recognize his competence, and that need created vulnerability, because competence demanded proof and proof required action, and Stone anticipated that the killer would now attempt something smaller but more personal, an act that reaffirmed control without requiring broad attention, and that meant Stone himself was again at risk of becoming the focal point, and he accepted that risk with clear-eyed resolve, adjusting his routines just enough to observe without provoking, and in doing so he noticed a pattern he hadn't before, a recurring presence in spaces he frequented, not always the same person, but the same style of observation, the same peripheral awareness, and Stone realized the killer might not be watching him directly, but through proxies, using borrowed eyes, informal networks of watchers who didn't know they were participating, and this insight shifted Stone's strategy again, because it meant the killer's control was more diffuse than he had assumed, relying on the city's natural tendency to observe itself, and Stone began mapping these observational chains, tracing how information moved through casual conversations, how rumors traveled from bus stops to offices to bars, and he saw how easily a man could monitor reaction without ever appearing, and that realization sharpened Stone's understanding of the killers. Psychology, because it revealed a man who trusted systems of observation more than individuals, who believed truth emerged from aggregate behavior rather than personal connection, and this belief explained both his patience and his isolation, and Stone decided to disrupt that system by introducing noise, by altering his own observable patterns unpredictably, creating data that contradicted expectation, and Keller coordinated quietly, ensuring that Stone's apparent movements did not align with reality, and the effect was immediate. Another message arrived, confused in tone, questioning assumptions, and Stone knew then that the killer's internal model of the world was destabilizing, because models depended on consistent input, and Stone was denying him that consistency. And as days stretched into weeks without a decisive act, the public's attention drifted, the name Thrill Killer fading from headlines, replaced by newer anxieties, and Stone felt the balance shift decisively, because anonymity, once a source of power for the killer, was now becoming a prison, trapping him in a story no one was reading anymore, and Stone anticipated that this would force a choice, either retreat into obscurity or a final attempt to reclaim authorship through direct engagement. And the latter came one quiet evening when Keller received a call from a patrol officer about a man waiting calmly in the lobby of the Hall of Justice, asking to speak with Inspector Stone by name. No weapon visible, no agitation, just patience, and Stone felt a slow, steady focus settle over him, because he had imagined this moment many times, not as triumph but as responsibility. And when he entered the interview room, he saw not a monster but a man of unremarkable appearance, his posture relaxed, his gaze steady, and Stone recognized him instantly, not from any photograph, but from the quality of his attention, the way he absorbed the room without reacting to it. And their conversation unfolded without dramatics, the man speaking of his work, his observations, his belief that cities revealed their truths only under pressure, and Stone listened, allowing the man to articulate his worldview fully, because interrupting would only prolong the need to be heard. And when the man finally paused, waiting for acknowledgement, Stone responded not with validation or condemnation, but with a simple statement of fact, that the city had continued, that the systems he sought to expose had adapted quietly, that his actions, whatever their intention, had not produced the revelation he'd hoped for, and the man's composure faltered just enough to reveal the core wound beneath it, the fear of having been inconsequential, and Stone pressed gently, not accusing but reframing, suggesting that the killer's obsession with authorship had blinded him to the truth that cities were not narratives, but accumulations, resistant to singular meaning, and the man listened, visibly unsettled, because Stone was denying him the role he had written for himself, not antagonist, not visionary, but footnote, and that denial, more than arrest, drained the momentum from him, and when the formalities followed, the cuffs placed without resistance, Stone felt no satisfaction, only a sober relief, because the end had come not with spectacle but with quiet containment, and as the man was led away, Stone reflected on the fragile line between observation and participation, on how easily watching could become a substitute for living, and in the days that followed, as the city absorbed the news with muted reaction, Stone understood that this mutedness was the true resolution, the killer's story dissolving into the larger, messier story of the city, and Stone returned to his routines, the weight lifting gradually, because he knew the victory lay not in headlines but in continuity, in the city's ability to move on without granting meaning to someone who had tried to claim it through fear. And as Stone stood once more by his office window, watching fog roll over familiar streets, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction, not pride but equilibrium restored, knowing that some stories ended not with punctuation but with silence, and that silence, carefully earned, was sometimes the most just ending of all. In the weeks following the quiet surrender, San Francisco did not erupt into catharsis or celebration, and that absence of spectacle shaped the aftermath more than any press conference ever could, because the city absorbed the end of the case the same way it absorbed everything else, unevenly, imperfectly, folding it into the ongoing noise of daily life, and Mike Stone observed this process with a reflective calm, aware that resolution in cases like this was rarely clean, rarely complete, because while a man could be contained, the conditions that had allowed him to operate so invisibly could not be erased by an arrest. And Stone felt this truth most acutely during the debriefings that followed, sessions meant to extract lessons, but which often drifted into abstractions about systems, oversight, and the thin margins between routine and neglect. And Keller, sitting beside him in those meetings, voiced a shared unease that the killer's greatest insight, however distorted, had been his understanding of how easily attention could be guided, how predictability created blind spots. And Stone knew that acknowledging this did not mean honoring the killer, but did mean confronting an uncomfortable reality about modern cities, about how complexity itself could become camouflage. And as the department reviewed timelines and decisions, Stone found himself defending choices that prioritized silence over spectacle, explaining again and again that denying attention was not avoidance but strategy. And while some colleagues understood, others remained skeptical, conditioned to equate visibility with effectiveness. And this tension mirrored the broader cultural response, because outside the department the story faded quickly, overshadowed by new crimes, new scandals, new distractions, and Stone recognized that this fading was itself a form of justice, because the killer's carefully constructed narrative had failed to embed itself in public memory, dissolving instead into a footnote. And yet Stone could not fully disengage, because the case had left an imprint on his thinking, reshaping how he understood motivation, control, and the ethics of observation. And this introspection deepened when he was asked to testify at a closed hearing examining systemic vulnerabilities exposed during the investigation. And Stone approached this task with the same restraint he had shown throughout the case, careful not to dramatize, careful not to simplify, emphasizing that the danger lay not in exceptional evil but in ordinary gaps, in moments when no one felt responsible because responsibility was diffused, and his testimony resonated quietly, prompting incremental changes rather than sweeping reforms. And Stone accepted that too, because incremental change was more sustainable, less prone to backlash. And in the months that followed, those small changes accumulated, new redundancies introduced, oversight adjusted, communication pathways clarified, and while none of it was headline-worthy, Stone recognized their value, because they addressed the kind of vulnerabilities the killer had exploited, not by closing the city down, but by making it slightly less predictable. And Keller, watching these developments, remarked one evening that the case had changed Stone, and Stone did not deny it, acknowledging that every long pursuit left traces, shaping the way you listened, the way you weighed silence against action. And this change manifested in Stone's approach to subsequent cases, where he found himself paying closer attention to absence, to what was not said, to patterns that emerged only when noise was stripped away. And his reputation within the department subtly shifted, colleagues seeking his perspective not just on tactics, but on interpretation, on how narratives formed around crimes, and how those narratives could mislead as easily as they could illuminate. And this role sat uneasily with Stone at times, because he resisted the idea of being an authority on meaning, preferring instead to remain a reader of situations, someone who interpreted without imposing. And yet he could not escape the recognition that his handling of the thrill killer's case had set a precedent, demonstrating that restraint could be as decisive as force. And this precedent drew attention from outside agencies, consultants, academics interested in the psychology of non-spectacular resolution. And while Stone cooperated selectively, he avoided becoming a symbol, wary of the irony that even success could become another narrative trap. And in quieter moments, Stone reflected on the man now sitting in a cell, stripped of audience, his elaborate self-concept eroding in isolation. And Stone did not take pleasure in that erosion, because he understood the cost of neglect, how easily observation could replace connection. And this understanding fueled a subtle shift in Stone's own life, prompting him to re-engage with the city, not as an object of study, but as a lived environment, spending more time walking without purpose, listening without analyzing, allowing unpredictability to exist without immediately framing it as threat. And these walks became a kind of recalibration, reminding him that vigilance did not require detachment, that awareness could coexist with presence, and Keller noticed this change too, commenting on how Stone seemed lighter, less burdened by the need to resolve everything, and Stone acknowledged that the case had taught him something paradoxical, that some resolutions were strongest when they resisted closure, when they allowed ambiguity to persist without demanding explanation, and this philosophy influenced how Stone approached mentorship, guiding younger inspectors to question not just how to catch criminals, but how to avoid becoming trapped in the stories criminals wanted to tell. And these conversations often circled back to the same theme, that power lay not in reaction, but in choice, in deciding when to engage and when to withhold. And as time passed, the city continued to evolve, new technologies introduced, new patterns emerging, and Stone remained attentive to how these changes reshaped the landscape of attention, because he knew that the conditions that had produced the Thrill Killers case were not unique, that similar dynamics could arise again under different guises. And this awareness did not breed paranoia but preparedness, a quiet readiness grounded in experience rather than fear. And when Stone occasionally encountered references to the case in academic journals or obscure articles, he read them with detachment, noting how often analysis drifted toward dramatization despite the reality of the ending. And he understood then that society struggled with anticlimax, preferring narratives that affirmed clear heroes and villains, and Stone accepted that his role had been to resist that impulse, to protect the city, not just from harm, but from oversimplification, and this acceptance brought a sense of closure that no arrest alone could provide. And on an ordinary evening, standing once more by his office window as fog rolled in from the bay, Stone felt the city's familiar hum settle around him, the layered soundscape of lives intersecting without coordination, and he felt gratitude not for victory but for continuity, for the fact that the city remained too complex, too diffuse, to be authored by any single will. And in that complexity, Stone found reassurance, because it meant that while individuals could disrupt, they could not define, and that realization anchored him as he moved forward, carrying the lessons of the case, not as doctrine but as perspective, a lens through which to view future uncertainties. And as he turned away from the window, ready to return to the work that never truly ended, Stone understood that the true legacy of the Thrill Killers case was not the man who had been stopped, but the quiet affirmation that attention, when handled with care, could be reclaimed, redirected, and ultimately denied to those who sought to weaponize it. And that denial, uncelebrated and unremarked, was perhaps the most humane outcome possible in a city that would always belong to no one and everyone at once. Time, which had felt distorted during the height of the case, slowly resumed its ordinary pace. Yet Mike Stone discovered that ordinary did not mean unchanged, because the residue of the Thrill Killers investigation lingered in subtle ways, shaping not only his own instincts, but the institutional memory of the department. And as months passed, the case resurfaced intermittently through appeals, evaluations, and academic inquiries, each one threatening to reframe the story in ways Stone felt uneasy about, because reframing carried the risk of restoring the very attention they had worked so carefully to deny, and Stone became increasingly deliberate about how he spoke of the case, choosing language that emphasized process over personality, context over confrontation, and in doing so, he quietly resisted the gravitational pull of myth-making, even as others seemed eager to resurrect it, and Keller, ever pragmatic, teased him about becoming philosophical in his middle years. But Stone understood this shift as necessity rather than indulgence, because the case had revealed how easily narrative could become a secondary crime, reshaping public memory long after the immediate danger had passed. And Stone was determined not to let that happen unchecked. And this determination was tested when a young journalist approached him with a proposal for an in-depth retrospective, promising nuance and restraint, and Stone listened politely before declining, explaining that some stories lost their truth when revisited too often. And though the journalist was disappointed, Stone felt relief, because he sensed how quickly nuance could be sacrificed for cohesion, and cohesion was the killer's original obsession. And in quieter moments, Stone reflected on the man, now undergoing psychiatric evaluation, reports filtering back through official channels, describing a gradual erosion of certainty, moments of anger punctuated by long stretches of withdrawal. And Stone read these reports without satisfaction, aware that confinement stripped away the audience, but also stripped away structure, leaving behind a man confronted with the emptiness he had tried so desperately to avoid. And Stone did not romanticize this outcome, because he knew suffering alone did not equal insight, and yet he hoped, quietly, that isolation might eventually do what attention never could, force a reckoning unmediated by reaction. And this hope influenced Stone's stance during sentencing discussions, where he advocated against grand statements or symbolic gestures, arguing instead for proportionality and containment. And though some officials pushed for language that emphasized deterrence, Stone maintained that deterrence built on spectacle was unstable, and his perspective, shaped by the case, carried weight, guiding the process toward a resolution that felt deliberately unremarkable. And that unremarkableness became a theme in Stone's life afterward, manifesting in his renewed appreciation for routine, for the predictability of morning coffee, for the quiet satisfaction of cases that resolved without drama. And these moments grounded him, reminding him that police work was not meant to be heroic narrative but sustained service. And yet the thrill killer's case continued to echo in unexpected places, such as a training seminar where a senior analyst referenced it obliquely while discussing emergent threats, framing it as an example of adaptive criminal behavior. And Stone listened carefully, noting how easily the language drifted toward admiration, toward describing elegance and sophistication. And after the seminar, he approached the analyst privately, cautioning that precision should not be confused with brilliance. That method did not imply meaning, and the analyst nodded, thoughtful, and Stone hoped the point had landed, because he recognized how thin the line was between analysis and inadvertent praise. And as Stone navigated these professional spaces, he also found himself confronting more personal reverberations, particularly in his relationship with the city itself, because San Francisco no longer felt like a neutral backdrop, but like an active participant, a living system whose complexity both enabled and constrained human behavior. And this awareness deepened Stone's empathy, not just for victims, but for ordinary citizens navigating systems they barely understood. And this empathy reshaped how he approached interviews, how he listened, for hesitation rather than contradiction. And Keller noticed this too, remarking that Stone seemed less interested in catching people in lies and more interested in understanding how truths fractured under pressure. And Stone accepted the observation, because the case had taught him that fractures were often more revealing than confessions, and this philosophy guided him through a series of subsequent investigations that lacked the drama of the thrill killer's case, but carried their own quiet stakes. And Stone found satisfaction in resolving these cases efficiently, without narrative excess, as if each one reaffirmed the value of understatement. And yet even as Stone settled into this recalibrated rhythm, he remained alert to the possibility that the conditions underlying the thrill killer's case could re-emerge in new forms, because cities evolved, technology shifted, and attention itself became more fragmented, more volatile. And Stone followed these shifts closely, attending briefings on emerging communication platforms, on how information cascaded differently now, and he recognized familiar dynamics in new guises, the same hunger for visibility, the same temptation to manipulate reaction. And this recognition did not alarm him so much as steady him, because he understood now that vigilance was not about anticipating specific threats, but about maintaining interpretive humility, resisting the urge to impose clean narratives on messy realities. And this humility informed Stone's mentorship, where he emphasized patience, proportion, and the ethics of attention, reminding younger inspectors that not every provocation required response, and that restraint could be an active choice rather than a failure of nerve. And these lessons resonated unevenly, because restraint lacked the immediate validation of action, but Stone persisted, believing that culture shifted slowly through repetition rather than decree. And as the year turned, the Thrill Killers case faded further into institutional history, referenced less frequently, its details blurring at the edges, and Stone found comfort in that blurring because it signaled that the case was losing its grip on collective imagination, becoming one of many rather than singular. And this normalization felt like the final, quiet victory. And on an unremarkable afternoon, Stone received a brief note from Keller, who had transferred temporarily to another division, remarking on how strange it felt to work cases that didn't carry existential weight. And Stone smiled at the understatement, replying simply that most cases were like that. And that was the point. And as Stone continued his work, he carried the lessons of the Thrill Killers case not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder of balance, of the importance of denying excess meaning where none was deserved. And this balance anchored him through moments of doubt, through nights when the city's noise seemed overwhelming. And in those moments, Stone returned to the simple act of observation without interpretation, watching lights flicker on and off across hills, listening to the layered hum of traffic and voices, and allowing complexity to exist without resolution. And in that acceptance, Stone found a quiet steadiness, a sense that his role was not to impose order on chaos, but to mitigate harm while respecting the city's inherent unpredictability. And this perspective sustained him as he moved forward, aware that while the Thrill Killers case had ended, the conditions that shaped it remained, shifting and recombining, and Stone remained ready, not with fear or anticipation, but with a practiced calm rooted in the understanding that the most dangerous stories were often the ones people wanted to tell the most, and that his duty, above all, was to ensure that those stories did not eclipse the lived reality of a city too complex to belong to any single voice. The approach of another high-profile case tested everything Mike Stone believed he had learned in the long aftermath of the Thrill Killers investigation, because this new sequence of events did not arrive with spectacle or provocation, but with a slow accumulation of minor disturbances that most people overlooked. A missing transit report here, a delayed response there, fragments that only revealed their shape when viewed sideways, and Stone sensed early that this was precisely the kind of pattern that could grow dangerous if misunderstood, because unlike the Thrill Killers, this emerging threat did not crave attention, it thrived on neglect, and that difference unsettled him more than overt provocation ever had. And as he and Keller began quietly comparing notes, they realized that the city itself seemed slightly misaligned, as if its routines had slipped half a step out of rhythm, and Stone felt the familiar tension between urgency and restraint, because reacting too quickly could impose a false narrative, while waiting too long could allow harm to take root. And this balance, he knew now, was the real work, the kind that rarely made headlines but defined outcomes. And Keller, back from his temporary transfer, remarked that the city felt tired, and Stone agreed, interpreting that fatigue as vulnerability, because tired systems tolerated inefficiencies, and inefficiencies were where intent could hide. And as they dug deeper, Stone noticed how institutional memory worked selectively, how references to past cases emerged only when convenient, and he resisted comparisons to the Thrill Killers, even as others drew them reflexively, because he recognized the danger of analogy, how it could flatten context and distort response, and instead he insisted on treating each anomaly on its own terms, reconstructing timelines, interviewing overlooked personnel, listening for what was missing rather than what was emphasized. And this methodical approach frustrated some supervisors eager for decisive action. But Stone held firm, explaining that decisiveness built on assumption was indistinguishable from negligence. And this stance, shaped by hard-earned experience, earned him reluctant latitude. And as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the disturbances were linked not by ideology or spectacle, but by opportunity, a series of small exploitations of procedural gaps. And Stone felt a grim recognition, because this was the logical evolution of the dynamics he had studied before. Attention had become too risky, too traceable, and now harm moved quietly through overlooked spaces. And this realization prompted Stone to rethink how threat assessment was taught, because the absence of noise no longer signaled safety, and he shared these concerns during internal briefings, emphasizing that silence could be strategic, and while some colleagues nodded, others struggled to adjust, conditioned by years of responding to visible crises. And Stone understood this resistance. Because visibility was comforting, it gave shape to fear. And without shape, fear became abstract, harder to mobilize against, and yet Stone persisted, because he knew that adapting perception was as important as adapting tools, and as evidence accumulated, he found himself returning mentally to the Thrill Killer's case, not to its details, but to its lessons about narrative restraint, and he consciously avoided framing this new investigation as a sequel or escalation, because doing so would invite comparison and expectation, and instead he treated it as a study in system stress, mapping how small failures cascaded, and this perspective led them to an unlikely focal point, a mid-level contractor whose work intersected multiple departments, creating a web of access that no one had fully audited, and Stone approached this discovery cautiously, aware of how easily suspicion could harden into accusation, and he insisted on verification at every step, reconstructing access logs, correlating them with shifts and reported anomalies, and the pattern that emerged was subtle but consistent, and Keller remarked that it was almost elegant, and Stone corrected him gently, reminding him that efficiency did not equate to intent, and that even this pattern might dissolve under scrutiny, and that humility guided their next steps as they interviewed the contractor without confrontation, allowing inconsistencies to surface organically, and Stone observed how the man spoke in abstractions, deflecting specifics, and Stone recognized this not as guilt necessarily, but as insulation, a way of maintaining distance from consequence. And this insight resonated deeply, because it echoed the emotional distancing he had seen before, albeit without the theatricality. And as the interview progressed, Stone felt the weight of accumulated experience guiding his instincts, telling him when to press and when to pause. And this rhythm produced results, not a confession, but a clarification of scope, revealing that the contractor had not orchestrated harm directly, but had facilitated conditions that allowed others to do so. And this complexity complicated response, because accountability became diffuse, and Stone found himself advocating for systemic correction alongside individual consequence, arguing that removing one actor without addressing the structure would only invite repetition. And this argument echoed his earlier positions, reinforcing his belief that prevention lay in design rather than deterrence. And as the department grappled with this approach, Stone sensed both progress and limitation, because institutions resisted introspection, preferring externalization of blame, and yet some changes were implemented, audits expanded, communication channels clarified, and Stone viewed these incremental shifts as meaningful, even if they lacked drama. And personally, he felt a quiet affirmation, because this investigation validated his post-Thrill Killer's philosophy, proving that restraint and patience could uncover threats that spectacle-driven approaches missed, and yet the emotional toll remained, because working with an ambiguity required sustained attention without the relief of resolution, and Stone felt this strain during long evenings reviewing reports, aware that certainty might never arrive fully formed, and in those moments he relied on Keller's presence, their shared shorthand, the unspoken understanding that not knowing was sometimes the most honest state, and this partnership grounded him, reminding him that police work was collaborative interpretation rather than solitary heroism. And as the case reached a controlled conclusion, with charges filed, systems revised, and no public narrative to latch onto, Stone felt a mix of relief and unease, because success without recognition felt fragile, easily undone by complacency, and he resolved to document the process meticulously, not for acclaim, but for continuity, ensuring that lessons persisted beyond memory. And this documentation became a quiet project, one that occupied his mornings and evenings, translating lived experience into procedural insight. And as he wrote, Stone reflected on how the Thrill Killer's case had reshaped his understanding of threat, attention, and responsibility, not by providing answers, but by sharpening questions. And this sharpening defined his work now, guiding him through complexity without forcing closure. And, as the city continued its restless motion around him, Stone accepted that his role was not to still that motion, but to navigate it with care, aware that harm adapted as quickly as systems did, and that vigilance was less about vigilance itself and more about sustaining curiosity without fear. And this mindset, forged through years of experience, carried him forward, ready not for the next dramatic case, but for the next quiet deviation, knowing that meaning often hid in what people overlooked, and that his task was to notice without amplifying, to respond without performing, and to serve a city whose greatest strength and greatest risk lay in its endless complexity. As the city edged toward another seasonal shift, with fog rolling in earlier and the streets growing quieter by degrees rather than design, Mike Stone found himself increasingly reflective, not in a nostalgic sense, but in a professional one, because the cumulative weight of years on the job had begun to reshape how he understood continuity. And this understanding was sharpened by the subtle realization that cases did not truly end so much as they dispersed, leaving traces in procedure, in instinct, in the unspoken assumptions officers carried into new situations. And Stone recognized that the Thrill Killers case, despite its apparent closure, continued to exert influence through these dispersed traces, shaping how he interpreted risk, how he gauged silence, and how he measured the difference between coincidence and convergence. And this awareness became particularly vivid when he was asked to review a series of internal training materials intended for new inspectors, materials that reference past cases in simplified terms, distilling complex investigations into bullet points and diagrams. And Stone felt a quiet discomfort as he read through the summaries, noticing how easily ambiguity was erased in the interest of clarity, how uncertainty was reframed as error rather than condition. And he understood why this happened, because institutions value transmissible knowledge, not unresolved questions. And yet he worried that this compression produced a false confidence, a belief that patterns were more stable than they truly were. And during a review meeting, he voiced these concerns carefully, suggesting that training should emphasize interpretive caution alongside technique. And while some colleagues agreed, others pushed back, arguing that recruits needed certainty before they could handle nuance. And Stone did not dispute the need for foundations, but he countered that foundations built without acknowledging instability eventually cracked. And this exchange lingered with him afterward, because it echoed the broader tension he had been navigating since the Thrill Killers case, the tension between clarity and honesty. And this tension resurfaced again when he was asked to consult informally on a cold case review, not because of similarities in method, but because of parallels in media interest. And Stone approached the review with restraint, focusing on procedural gaps rather than speculative motives. And he noted how quickly discussion drifted toward narrative reconstruction, toward imagining intent as a way of filling evidentiary voids. And he intervened gently, reminding the group that speculation, while emotionally satisfying, often foreclosed alternative interpretations. And this intervention shifted the tone, grounding the review in what could be verified rather than what could be imagined. And afterward, a junior detective thanked Stone, admitting that it was tempting to chase coherence even when it wasn't supported. And Stone appreciated the honesty, recognizing in it a younger version of himself, one less tempered by the consequences of overinterpretation. And this moment reinforced his growing commitment to mentorship, not as instruction but as modeling, showing through practice how restraint functioned as an act of skill. And beyond the department, Stone noticed similar dynamics playing out in public discourse, where crime was increasingly framed through binaries of menace and heroism. And he followed these discussions with measured detachment, aware of how such framing simplified public understanding while complicating real-world response. And although he rarely engaged publicly, he occasionally spoke at closed forums, emphasizing the ethical responsibility embedded in attention, arguing that amplification was not neutral, that it shaped behavior on both sides of the law. And these talks were met with mixed reactions, some appreciative, others skeptical. But Stone accepted this ambivalence as inevitable because challenging narrative comfort zones rarely produced immediate consensus, and on a more personal level, the accumulated reflection began to influence how Stone experienced time outside of work, because he found himself more attuned to gradual change, to how relationships evolve through small adjustments rather than decisive moments. And this attunement brought both calm and melancholy, as he recognized the limits of intervention, the reality that not all trajectories could be redirected, and this recognition softened his judgments, making him less reactive and more observant. And Keller noticed this shift too, remarking one evening that Stone seemed less burdened by the need to solve everything, and Stone responded that solving was often overrated, that understanding conditions mattered more than fixing outcomes, and Keller nodded, acknowledging the wisdom while joking that it sounded like something best appreciated late in a career, and Stone smiled, aware that perspective was not a function of age alone but of accumulation, of carrying unresolved questions long enough that they lost their urgency but retained their significance, and this balance was tested again when a minor incident briefly attracted disproportionate media attention, prompting calls for aggressive response, and Stone advised restraint, cautioning that escalation could validate misplaced fears, and his advice prevailed, the incident resolving quietly. And afterward he reflected on how easily fear could be misdirected, how quickly attention could inflate threat perception, and this reflection brought him back, once again, to the core lesson of the Thrill Killers case, that attention was not merely a byproduct of crime, but a variable within it, one that could intensify or diminish harm depending on how it was managed, and this insight had become so integrated into his thinking that it no longer felt like a lesson, but like a lens, shaping everything he saw. And as months passed, Stone began preparing for a transition he had not yet fully articulated, not retirement necessarily, but a shift in role, a gradual movement toward advisory work that would allow him to focus on structural thinking rather than immediate response. And this prospect felt both relieving and unsettling, because it meant relinquishing the immediacy that had defined much of his career, and yet it also felt appropriate, a continuation rather than an ending. And as he contemplated this shift, he revisited his notes from past cases, including the Thrill Killers investigation, reading them not for detail but for tone, noticing how his language had changed over time, becoming less declarative and more provisional, and he took this as a sign of growth rather than erosion, because certainty, he had learned, was not the same as competence. And on a quiet evening, walking through a neighborhood that had once been central to the case, he felt no surge of memory, only a muted awareness of continuity, of life proceeding without regard for the narratives once imposed upon it. And this ordinariness felt like affirmation, evidence that harm had not defined the space permanently. And as he watched people move through the streets, absorbed in their own routines, Stone felt a renewed commitment to protecting that ordinariness, to ensuring that extraordinary events did not eclipse the everyday fabric of the city. And this commitment, understated and persistent, felt like the true legacy of his work, more meaningful than any solved case. And as he returned home, carrying these reflections with him, he understood that the Thrill Killers case had not taught him how to confront evil, but how to resist distortion, how to remain anchored in proportion amid forces that thrived on excess. And this understanding, quietly earned, continued to guide him, not toward grand conclusions, but toward sustained, thoughtful presence in a city that demanded nothing less. The idea of an ending, Mike Stone had come to understand, was largely a convenience, something people needed in order to step away from complexity without feeling irresponsible. And as he stood at the threshold of what others casually referred to as his final chapter, he felt none of the neat closure such language implied, only a gradual loosening of urgency, a subtle recalibration of attention, because the city did not pause to acknowledge transitions. It continued its layered movement with or without individual participation, and this realization framed Stone's final months not as a countdown, but as a distillation, a period in which accumulated experience condensed into instinct without fanfare. And this distillation was most apparent in the way he handled his remaining cases, not by delegating prematurely or disengaging, but by leaning into presence, making each interaction deliberate, each decision measured, as if he were consciously modeling a way of working that valued continuity over climax. And Keller, sensing the shift, joked less about retirement and more about legacy, though Stone resisted the term, because legacy implied ownership, and Stone believed that work like theirs belonged to systems rather than individuals, evolving through use rather than memory. And yet he could not deny that the Thrill Killers case had become a reference point, not because of its notoriety, but because of how profoundly it had challenged assumptions about meaning, attention, and response. And as he reviewed the final internal report he had been asked to contribute to, a broad assessment of emergent threats in urban environments, he noticed how often his language returned to restraint, to proportion, to the ethics of amplification, and he recognized this as the through line of his career's later years, a quiet insistence that how institutions reacted mattered as much as what they reacted to, and this insistence felt especially relevant as new technologies continued to accelerate information flow, compressing reaction time and encouraging immediacy at the expense of reflection. And Stone worried not about malicious intent so much as about reflex, about systems trained to respond faster than they could interpret, and he articulated this concern during his final formal briefing, speaking not as an authority issuing directives, but as a practitioner sharing accumulated uncertainty. And while the room was attentive, Stone understood that understanding would come unevenly, absorb selectively, because such insights rarely align neatly with performance metrics. And yet he spoke anyway, because articulation itself was a form of resistance against oversimplification. And after the briefing, a few colleagues lingered, asking questions not about procedures but about judgment, about how to know when to wait and when to act, and Stone answered honestly, admitting that there was no formula, only practice, only the willingness to accept discomfort, and this admission seemed to resonate more than any definitive guidance could have, because it acknowledged the reality of the work without offering false reassurance. And later, as Stone began clearing his office, a task he approached slowly, he found artifacts he had nearly forgotten, old notebooks filled with observations, some precise, others speculative, and among them were pages from the Thrill Killers investigation, not the evidentiary summaries, but the margins, where he had written questions rather than conclusions. And reading these notes now, he felt a sense of continuity rather than distance, recognizing that the questions still mattered even if the case no longer did, because they spoke to conditions rather than events, and this distinction felt central to his understanding of what endured. And as he sorted through these materials, he made a conscious decision not to preserve everything, discarding much of it, because he believed that hoarding documentation could become another form of fixation. And what mattered more was how experience had reshaped his perception, a change that could not be archived but only enacted. And this enactment became evident in his final days on active duty, when a minor but potentially volatile incident unfolded, drawing anxious attention from both supervisors and media. And Stone, consulted almost reflexively, recommended a low-visibility response, emphasizing containment without commentary. And though there was hesitation, his recommendation was followed. The situation resolved quietly, and afterwards Stone felt a subdued satisfaction, not because he had been right, but because the system had trusted restraint, and this trust felt like progress, however incremental. And as his last day arrived, it did so without ceremony, no dramatic farewell, just a series of brief exchanges, handshakes, nods, shared glances that carried more meaning than words. And Keller, ever understated, told Stone that the city would miss him, to which Stone replied that the city never missed anyone, it simply adjusted. And they both understood the truth and the affection embedded in the exchange. And walking out of the building for the final time, Stone felt neither relief nor loss, only a heightened awareness of transition as a continuous state. And in the weeks that followed, as he settled into an advisory role that kept him adjacent to but no longer embedded within daily operations, he noticed how his relationship to the city changed again, becoming less tactical and more observational, and this observation brought a new appreciation for patterns that extended beyond crime, patterns of resilience, of adaptation, of ordinary life absorbing disruption and continuing nonetheless. And this appreciation reframed the thrill killer's case one final time, not as a confrontation with darkness, but as a lesson in limits, in how easily meaning could be inflated, and how essential it was to resist that inflation in order to protect the mundane spaces where most life actually unfolded. And Stone found himself sharing this perspective in writing, contributing essays that focus not on cases but on process, on the dangers of narrative excess. And while these writings attracted modest attention, Stone did not measure their success by reach, but by reception, by the thoughtful responses they elicited from practitioners grappling with similar concerns. And this exchange felt like a continuation of the work by other means, quieter but no less significant. And occasionally, he was asked about the thrill killer's case directly, and when he spoke of it, he did so without embellishment, framing it as one investigation among many, important for what it revealed about systems rather than for what it dramatized. And this framing often disappointed those seeking sensation, but Stone accepted that disappointment as part of his responsibility, because withholding drama was, in its own way, an ethical act. And as time passed, references to the case became rarer, its name losing currency, and Stone viewed this fading not as erasure but as resolution, because true resolution, he believed, was not about remembrance but about integration, about lessons absorbed so fully that they no longer required conscious recall. And on a fog-laced evening, walking along a familiar street, Stone paused, listening to the city's layered sounds, traffic, voices, distant sirens, all blending into a steady hum, and he felt a sense of alignment, not with any singular outcome, but with process itself, with the ongoing negotiation between order and unpredictability that defined urban life. And he understood that his work had always been about facilitating that negotiation, about reducing harm without demanding narrative dominance. And this understanding brought a quiet contentment, free of triumph or regret. And as he continued walking, merging back into the flow of ordinary movement, Stone carried with him the final, unspoken conclusion of the thrill killer's story, that the most meaningful victories were often invisible, measured not in attention captured but in attention denied, not in stories told but in stories that never took shape, because harm had been contained without amplification. And in that containment, in that deliberate refusal to glorify or distort, Stone recognized the truest expression of his craft, one that ended not with resolution, but with continuity, leaving the city to breathe, to adapt, and to remain complex, restless, and enduring, long after any single narrative had faded from view.